Go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. It was explained to me that apparently people are interested in this in development Wikifont. So here we are. Um, Basically, to preface this a bit, a few months ago we were working on getting some icons in Flow, and they were already there, but for the most part we were using SVGs. Now, when I came along, one of the main issues that we were experiencing was a lack of support for Internet Explorer. The older versions really, and the icons just didn't scale at all. And to implement any sort of scaling for that would have involved having to use PNGs, which are converted automatically from the SVGs, but it gets a lot more complex than that, and it just basically made it a nightmare, and our CSS would have gotten quite bloated from having to load all these different data URIs and remote URLs. So eventually it came to be that we would create an icon set, basically glyph icons. And the primary inspiration for this was Twitter's Bootstrap, which has a pretty good icon set. We even used that for a while we were developing our new version of Flow as an interim solution. So we did that, but then May, over the course of one random weekend, basically just kind of implemented a bunch of them, made a whole glyph icon set, and we've been using that since. It's been iterated upon, and the end goal is to make it fairly robust and try to meet as many of the needs as possible for everybody at the foundation and MediaWiki users in general. So that's where we're at now. It's still a work in progress, so keep that in mind as we do explain this to you. So I mean, what I'd like to go through with you guys is kind of give you a quick rundown of what it looks like and how you can use it. And we'll also talk about how you guys can get involved in requesting icons that you might need for your project, and how you could submit your own icon if you need to. And May will be covering those topics. I'll be covering more of the technical aspect of this. So what I'll do with you guys now is I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can hold that up for you. All right, let's see this.
Oh God.
So, let's take a look. So, currently, Wikifont.
Can you increase your font size, please?
Yeah. Wikifont is up on GitHub at this point in time, under Munmay's account, Wikifont. You might be a little confused as to why it's called Wikifont. I was too for a while. Essentially, right now, what we have is Wikifont-glyphs, which is a subset of an eventual Wikifont. I think May's goal at some point is to develop an entire font. But at this point, the beginning part of it is just the glyph icon set. So that's what you'll have access to at this point in time. So this is where you would put any issues that you have with this, pull requests, whatever else you need to do. And it's quite in development. And this is basically the current set of icons. It might be a little bit more expansive than this. I think there's a few more that aren't listed here. But in general, this is what we have so far. And more will be added. You'll see there's even a few icons that can be layered. And we'll cover layering icons in a bit as well. But essentially, this is what you have. And if you find, I think this should meet a lot of needs, especially, these first few right here. But beyond this, there will definitely be more icons that need to come out. And I know even on Flow, we do have a few more icons in the pipeline that we're going to be needing. Now let's take a look at this CSS. Basically, what we do is we determine font face, which is just the glyph icon set, and then we create a base class, which is Wikiglyph. And this just puts on that font and then sets some very basic styles on it so that it always looks crisp. And then there's a bunch of these individual class names that actually implement the icons themselves. So, I mean, the way you would use this, in the instance that you wanted to use a flag, you would create, say, a span, for example, and then you would name the span's class as Wikiglyph, and then a second class, which is Wikiglyph flag. That would essentially assign the font and all the other styling that goes along with it, and then insert the actual icon itself. Now, what this would do is this would work for pretty much most browsers. However, it wouldn't work for IE6 and 7 because they lack support for this selector. However, should we actually need support for IE6 and 7, we could easily drop in a CSS rule that does it with basically CSS JavaScript, and only for IE6 and 7. So, I mean, it's a small performance hit, but not a huge one, given that it doesn't need to be super dynamic. So if you had a question whether or not this supports IE6 7, it could, and at some point the goal is for it to actually do so. But right now, it's not really a concern for us because we're not really using it anywhere that really mandates IE6 and 7 support in that regard. So this is what it looks like right now in use. We're using a few icons here, and that's kind of all over the place. Now, the nice thing about this is you'll notice we actually color our icons. They're all differently colored here, and this is something that you couldn't easily do with SVGs or PNGs without having to have multiple images. I think this is probably the biggest benefit to it, given that we can actually put context-aware colors that match the text that goes along with it. And in some scenarios, like this icon, we could just invert it. And there's even a little drop shadow there. So, I mean, this goes a long, long way in our design work because, I mean, you drop in the font, and then you put your icon in, and you're done. There's really nothing else to do. It inherits whatever color you need, whatever drop shadows, whatever else it is that you need, and it's just there. As opposed to before, where we would have had to have multiple variants of an individual icon, drop those into the CSS. It would reduce a lot of flexibility that we had in these scenarios. And here it's just inline. It's already the correct line height. It just matches. So, I mean, there's really not much to say about it. It's really, really straightforward, and the usage is incredibly simple. If we take a look at this, that's really all it is for that little edit icon right here. There's your span with the Wikiglyph pencil, and then edit. That's it. That's really all that we need to do for that. And as far as this goes, you can basically drop this in to anywhere you need and start using it. Currently, we are doing so in Flow. So if we take a look here, we've dropped this into our CSS for the Flow extension. Maybe I'll increase my font size a bit if it wants to. Feel free. I guess not. Well, it doesn't seem to want to increase my font size. Let's pretend it did. So that's basically it. We dropped it into this interactive .less file that we have in Flow, and this gives us our glyphs, and we can use it anywhere in our templates. We've modified it slightly on Flow because we wanted to have larger icons by default, but other than that, it's really all it is. I don't really have much else to say. Does anybody have any questions about the technical side of this?
So one question that I got before for someone who isn't here, couldn't be here today, was that they use the current SVGs and sometimes raster images as backgrounds, like they specified as a background within an element, and they were curious to know whether that was going to be possible with the Wikifonts.
It's possible. You would have to do it in a strange way, where basically the content of the element itself would be the icon, and then you just have to give it, I guess, a large font size. But I mean, it wouldn't work quite as well as an image in that instance. Browser support for that type of sizing of an element that's text like this wouldn't really work so well. I'm not entirely sure how we could go about doing that, and I personally wouldn't recommend it. If you want to use a background, then you should probably just use a background for that. But I'm not entirely sure what the context is, so it varies. If you had, say, you know, I don't know, a reasonably large version of one of these icons in the side that's just kind of faded out, it's doable. If you wanted a full-size background that scales to the exact size of your element, no, that's a lot more complicated to do and really wouldn't be possible with a font. Does that answer your question?
I will get back to them.
Another question from IRC is it possible to show this in Quick Fiddle or something?
In Quick Fiddle? That sounds like two things. I
What?
don't know what that is. What is Quick Fiddle?
Oh.
I don't know if it was a question from
You're
IRC.
shooting the messenger.
I think I'm in the wrong chat room. Damn it.
Well,
Okay.
the person will listen to the question and will know eventually.
Okay, so
There are questions in the Hangout chat, by the way, about RTL.
Yeah. Amir has RTL questions.
Sorry?
If we can ask questions in the IRC channel just to keep it clean, that would be awesome. But there are
Yeah.
questions in the too.
Those of you,
Wikimedia.
those of you in the Hangout, like for instance Amir, feel free just to ask.
Yeah, okay. So what are the questions? What's the channel? 'Cause I'm not in it.
It's your IN, it's a chat of the
The
Hangout.
window.
Oh, it's the chat of the Hangout. God. Sorry, guys.
Take 4 swipe to the side.
Okay, so Middle East rules. Thanks, Amir. How will RTL work? So RTL is I hadn't really we haven't implemented anything with regards to RTL. For the most part, the icons should be fine, and they will render somewhat fine. But the issue specifically would be that some of the icons actually need to be flipped, and that's doable with the CSS. Essentially, all it would be is a separate selector. In the scenario where an element or the page or anything is actually RTL, we would use a separate selector that overrides the previous one and uses a flipped icon. Does that solve your issue? I think there's probably a bit more specific issues in that with regards to RTL, but for most cases that should solve it.
That will probably kind of work. It's a bit of a regression from the way it works now, where you can put -ltr in the file name, and CSS will automatically make it -rtl if you're viewing an RTL language.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
It should be fine. I mean, for the most part, because this is all done in CSS as opposed to directly with the files themselves. So the only thing that kind of sucks about that is we would have to create the extra glyph that's flipped.
we already have to do that. That's not the concern.
Oh, all right then. Then I guess we're good.
So wait, so actually, maybe I'm trying to take some notes, but I don't follow. If the whole point is to have a single glyph that is flipped with code, why would we have a second flipped glyph?
It's not flipped code. He misspoke. You have to have two separate glyphs, and you have the CSS selector that chooses what icon is just going to choose one or the other symbol based on.
I'm saying why wouldn't we flip the character in code?
It's not possible.
Transform?
I think it is possible, actually. I've seen it in use.
Oh, yeah, using CSS transforms, which aren't going to work.
Yeah, CSS transforms won't work in this scenario because the glyph would be more. It could be more complex than just flipping it. When I say flip, I mean we'll have to create an extra glyph that's visually flipped, but the icon itself could be different in an RTL scenario. And there could be even very specific language-specific icon overrides that might need to be made. So do what you will with that information. Any other questions?
So I see this. I mean, GitHub's been doing this for a long time. I think that there's a lot of really cool things about this technology, but see this as like a major barrier to contribution because right now we have very, very low cost to sending icons from like a huge number of sources, extensions, core software, skins, and this is sort of making this huge monolith. Or if extensions or skins or core have separate files, now we're forced to load them separately, which you're adding like a lot of extra requests, whereas we used to be able to embed things on the fly into the CSS we were already loading, which is combined with the JavaScript. So like bare minimum, you're adding one request, and likely you're adding a lot more. But I think more problematically, that this is going to require, I assume you're probably using like FontForge as part of your build process, and this is going to require a more complicated build process, and it's going to like make it a lot more complex when we're trying to like get contribution from a variety of sources.
Right.
So what's the plan with that? I mean,
right now, essentially what this is for the most part, it's one, a proof of concept, and two, a solution for the Flow project. The long-term goal is for this to become a global tool for the entire MediaWiki usage on whatever projects you need to. And we haven't gotten to the point where we need to figure out what the process will be and how we'll kind of automate this. I would envision, ideally, essentially an automated font build whenever we modify the files if we need to. But we're not quite at that point, and I don't think we will be for a while. I think it's small enough that this still warrants being built by hand, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, wow, okay. So I just assumed that you were already using something like custom font to build it automatically.
May is currently building them using which tool, May?
It's called Font Prep. I found the thing in the GitHub repository. It was made open source recently, but it's only available on 64-bit OS X.
There's also custom font which uses FontForge, which is available on multiple platforms.
And is that open source?
FontForge.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm okay with switching this to a more automated process. Like I said, May kind of started whipping this up over the course of a weekend, so I haven't had a chance to really kind of look at changing the technical aspect of building the font. In a few weeks or a couple of months down the line, I'd be happy to do some work in switching that, unless anyone else wants to take it over. Feel free. And I mean, it shouldn't be too much work automating that, given that, the font and all the SVGs are already available.
Two other questions that came in before this. One was around accessibility and specifying alt text, and how that'll differ from using an image or an SVG. And then you were also going to actually talk a bit about stacking.
Right. So as far as the alt text goes, or rather the title, what would happen in that scenario is you would still have a separate element which has whatever icon, and you can give it a title. And we do that here on Flow, where when you hover over this, you have alt text, which is edit header there, and it applies here too. And essentially, that's really all there is to it. Go ahead.
Shire, I was wondering, is there a way, I don't know if there's a way in less or something to kind of make that sort of happen automatically. I guess you wouldn't, the individual user would have to know they're using the edit icon to represent edit title, but yeah, so I guess it can't really be generalized because, you know, the specific tooltip isn't just the meaning of the icon, it's what it means in that context.
Exactly. So, I mean, we can't do it in the less either way, and even if we could, it wouldn't make sense because, like Flow's case, for example, we use one icon in multiple places for different contexts.
All right, so it does make sense. Yeah, okay.
As far as stacking goes, so what Jared is referring to is the ability to stack these icons. Now, what you'll see here, I'm going to share my screen again. Here, we've got a few glyphs that are actually separate. This little lock here, this little pencil. What you could do is take this lock and put it on top of, say, this user. Now, right now, the CSS hasn't been implemented for this, but essentially there will be a wrapping class that you would be able to start stacking icons with. And the purpose for this would be so that you can layer multiple different icons with different colors. So what this would allow you to do is kind of create more colorful icon sets as opposed to a single color that we have now. So this has been a limitation of using this type of font as a glyph set, but people have gotten around it simply by using multiple icons. I think the best case, the best example of this that I saw that Jared had sent me was the actual GitHub logo, that little tentacle creature, I forget what it's called. They've built that using entirely with a font set. So it's like 6 or 7 layers, all separate colors. And it looks great. And it scales perfectly. And so that's something that's really available to us in this scenario, because once we do have a larger set of icons, you could take this male icon and stack this on top of it, and it would actually look all right because you could have them as separate colors, as opposed to having, you know, 2 gray on gray icons, which would not really make any sense. So I don't have any examples of it in use right now, but it's doable.
I pasted some URLs to some pretty neat examples of the exact same thing, but using a different font. If people want to play with that later, it's kind of neat.
Another question from IRC is, what would happen in text browsing?
What happens in text browsers is essentially nothing. Those browsers will have, because this is using a, what is it, PUA, there's basically a reserved range of font characters, and all the glyphs are in that range. So those browsers essentially show nothing in this scenario.
Well, it's also rendered using CSS, which those browsers don't use, so it sort of doesn't really matter what range you use.
Well, I think the concern was more because
character.
I think.
Pardon?
Sorry, go ahead.
You still show a tofu character, like just a square.
It's a text browser. They don't use CSS. You need CSS to apply the icon.
The weird characters inserted with colon before.
Yeah.
Content.
CSS3. If you're using a text browser, it probably doesn't support CSS3. Yeah, content. That's right.
I'm pretty sure that the text browser supports CSS3. It's not a text browser.
There's a question. So there's a question in the bug about whether this should be loaded first or not, because if it's an external reference, then in most browsers there's a flash font style content. Maybe that was covered before I got in.
No, we haven't covered this.
So, I mean, we could avoid that, I guess, by I could put into a data URI or.
No, it's not going to fit in a data URI. There's a 2048 limit.
It's 24 kilobytes.
So yeah, I guess that's the sort of downside of it is, if you know, presumably it appears as nothing until you have, because it's in this special Unicode block, and then when the font loads in, suddenly the icon kind of snaps into view.
Yeah, honestly, at this point, I'm not really sure. It does make sense to load it first, but it does end up blocking further loads until that file gets picked up. I don't know. I'm not really sure what our solution could be in that scenario. I'm open to suggestions if anyone knows what we should do to avoid a Flashpoint style content.
Well, the thing is, even if we loaded it at the top, you're going to end up with so many different ones. It's going to like really degrade like the perceived performance of the page because you're going to have to like block on a bunch of URLs that are loading like fonts for every single extension. And yeah, I would suggest not trying to do that.
Well, sorry, not trying. Oh,
Not trying to make sure that the fonts are all loaded before.
right. Just accept it. Okay.
So I have another question, which is kind of about the open source nature of it all. I noticed that the GitHub repository is BSD licensed. But what I don't see in the GitHub repository, or maybe it's there but I just haven't seen it, is like the actual source, like the format that you would make modifications to the icons in. Is that in the SVG file, or is it in some other file that's not in the repo?
May, you can answer that. Where are the original source files for the glyphs? Would in the SVG? I assume yes.
Like, if you're making a modification to an existing glyph, what file would you edit?
You can take the TTF file and open it in Wikifont, and you can just do whatever.
Okay, so the TTF file is the one that you would edit, and you would generate the other ones from a TTF file.
And if you were trying to review that sort of change on Garrett.
That's the other problem, which is that it's in GitHub right now. But
well, in any code review tool,
Yeah.
I guess like the point he's making, which I share the concern, is that this is like this current process. I believe this can be done in a way that can be more open source friendly. And custom font, for instance, like you can just give it a directory of SVG files and it'll build it for you. But like we need to move to that before this is even reasonably viable because it's like not a collaborative format.
is TTF binary?
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah, that's not going to be very good.
Well, you have the SVGs, which are for essentially plain text inside, whereas TTF and EOT are binary.
Again, if you can't modify the source in an open format that's not binary, then that's not going to work.
You could do it with SVG. SVG is open.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is we're going to need to migrate toward that being the build process. Probably using something.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I'm okay with that.
I need to look into that. I haven't done that.
Sure. Yeah. I just, without that, we're going to end up with, like, there's a few people who have, like, the software set up and the expertise to work on it. It's going to be this whole gatekeeping mechanism, and there's always going to be somebody who wants to use a font, an icon that hasn't been accepted yet or hasn't been like brought into the ecosystem or is like one version of MediaWiki behind or whatever, and it's just like costs like a total nightmare. But we need to make sure that like it's possible to contribute an icon directly to like the source repository in its source form and then just add it to the build process. And they
Yeah, I think essentially the SVG would probably be the best bet for that. We could probably automate this with Grunt or something. It'll be pretty straightforward, I think. To add on to the last question about the licensing, so currently the license is supposed to be BSD. However, the font files themselves accidentally have CC by SA 3.0 as their license. That'll be rectified this week. I think May is updating the font files on Friday with some other changes, and the license should be fixed at that point as well. There is a concern that the Commons logo is probably not BSD compatible.
Yeah, I have a meeting with legal to discuss the W mark and the Commons logo and how we'll handle that.
Okay. I really doubt that the W is going to be an issue, but the Commons logo could pose problems. So, I mean, you let us know what happens there, and we'll see whether or not we have to pull that out. In this particular scenario, assuming legal does decide that no, this does not qualify to stay in this font set, for what do you call it, Wikimedia itself, we'll have to create a separate build that includes our own logos.
Now, I mean, in general, is this something where if a site wants to reskin or change it, or would we say, oh, just make your own copy of Wikifont, or would we encourage them to make my special Wikifont and change I guess CSS rules to point to that?
I think the majority of use cases will simply be using the font set as is. However, once we do switch to a automated build process, especially if it's as simple as something like Grunt or like a little makefile, then other people can very easily have their own custom sets with their own fonts. And it doesn't really conflict because A, the font name would be different, and B, since we're just depending on class names, what this does is even if they were to add their own icons that conflict with an icon in the exact same space as one of our fonts, the class name is different, and that's all that's important. So yeah, ideally people would be able to make their own glyphs and have their own little font set, and I'm fairly sure that will be the case at the Wikimedia Foundation, since we'll want to drop in the various logos that we have, which are not in a public license.
That may be a good segue for me to jump in and show a little bit about how we've used this on the app project thus far, because we've had that exact issue come up where there were a few glyphs that weren't quite what we wanted for a particular layout, and we've done something a little bit different. We've created just a second font where we have some of these supplemental characters, yet we're still using the core font, and that's allowed us to kind of experiment with these glyphs that may or may not make their way back into the Wikifont. So that's another option that people can use. You can have this and then add your own if that's an approach that's working for your particular project. On the screen share right now, basically every icon you see on that screen is from a font. The Wikifont characters are the W, and the supplemental characters are the other ones that you're seeing, with the exception of the pencil, which is defined in CSS. If we actually tap on the edit pencil for this particular article, those icons that you see at the top are both Wikifont, and if we make a change to this piece of Wikitext, you can see how we're able to encode, change the background color of the right arrow. We're actually flipping that encode as well, and we can do that in a RTL-aware fashion, and changing, the background color to represent a disabled state versus an enabled state is just trivial now. And as a result of using Wikifont, we were able to take a few dozen PNGs, and I think their total size exceeded like 150K, and we're able to reduce that to, because we had to have separate PNGs for all these various states, and some of these buttons have many different states that can be in. And now that's just a single file that I believe hovers around 20K for the entire Wikifont. Some other examples in the app are, like, if I tap, it might be hard to see on the screen share, but as I tap on any of these icons, like I'm tapping on the W there, there's actually a tiny animation that I'm able to run natively, and because we're doing this, I suppose you'd have similar tricks you could do, if you're using this in HTML, but because we're using, kind of native iOS-y things here, we can do fun little, tap animations and things like that. If I bring up this secondary menu, you'll see a bunch of other font glyphs, which This might be changing because we're kind of tweaking this particular menu specifically, but those are also Wikifont characters. And from a code complexity kind of standpoint, it's just been very nice because we've been able to eliminate entire parts of the code that had previously gone in and automated kind of the process to crank out the SVGs that we needed for all of these various things. And it's kind of simplified the objects that now handle those sorts of buttons and button states. So it's actually been pretty easy to use. Let's see, we're even probably going to be doing a few stacking related things in the future. We're not presently doing anything with that, but I could see, like, if we're displaying an edit pencil for an article that has like a protection status, using those icons and layering them and coloring, say, the edit pencil a lighter gray than the lock, because if you gray out the lock, you know, it maybe starts looking a little confusing, and if you can draw more attention to the lock, it could be a little clearer. We're also able to not only do, you know, the sorts of animations that might just pulse, but we could do any sort of either directional rotations or, you know, just whatever we would need. But what's been cool for the apps project is this has kind of given us a nice touchstone that allows our designs to be kind of more consistent with a lot less work. Presently, we're only using this on iOS because there are some compatibility issues with older versions of Android, so they're still doing the, you know, PNG to SVG process there. But yeah, it's been a really neat tool that maybe we can experiment a little more freely with because the apps are kind of more experimental right now. So I think maybe one thing we didn't cover was just an actual example of the stacking. And I'll just bring up a page really quick that shows kind of a neat example of that. Let me switch my share real quick. Where is it? Let's see. Sorry, taking just a second. So this is one of those links that I pasted into the chat, and it's a little small, so let me zoom in. But it's just showing an example of the sorts of things you can do, and you can see how a lot of these icons have many colors going on because they're able to stack and change the colors of the individual parts when they do that. Probably from the app's perspective, the thing that's coolest about this is when we get to the point where we're going to do a sprint where we're focusing more on how's the app going to lay out on a tablet, we'll be able to increase the size of, say, the Chrome at the top and the bottom, and then just pick a larger size for these visual icon elements. And because they're, you know, not raster, they're going to scale and they're going to look crisp, you know, even at that larger size. And from a code perspective, it's trivial then to manage that. So,
what mobile targets are you guys using that don't support SVG? It goes pretty far back.
I'm sorry?
What mobile targets are you guys trying to support that don't support SVG?
Well, I don't specifically for, let's say, the native iOS app. They don't have a process right now, like a built-in object for rendering SVGs. And I think they do that kind of for performance reasons, perhaps. And so if you're going to display an image, you create basically a raster version of it. Or if you really want to do it, quote unquote, the right way, you do it in core animation or something like that, where it's basically allowing you to present vector information in a, you know, nice way.
Because like on mobile web, like it goes back pretty ancient, like well before.
Right.
It's Android 2 is a managed, which is still like has a large chunk of traffic, but Android 2 doesn't support it.
Yeah, that's pretty far back though.
But still has like a large chunk of.
Like what percentage? Like IE 67 percentage?
I think it's double
You can
digit.
still buy Android 2 phones easily like a year ago. Like a lot of the cheaper knockoff phones or just a lot of the cheaper phones in general are using older versions of Android.
Yeah.
And that as a requirement may change as those usage numbers change. But I think just for the first version of the rebooted app, we said we were going to support like 2.3. So yeah, that's kind of what we've been doing on the app with it. Does anyone have any questions about that? So May, did you want to chat a little bit about
Yeah. So on the design side, it's also been very easy for us because previously what we had to do was change icons, and it has been really challenging to let other people know that this icon, this specific icon, has been iterated on, and to update everyone, every engineer and every designer that this icon has been changed has been proven very challenging. And every single icon that we create new, we would have to pass it on to the developer, and they would have to convert it to PNG and whatsoever, and that was a long process. We also had to create each SVG file for any color that we're using, so that was a pain too. So hopefully this could help streamline that process a little bit and make it so much more easier on both ends. So if you have any icons that you guys need from us in the future, you can go to the site on MediaWiki right here on my screen share. So if you go down to icon requests at the bottom of the page, you can see that I set up this thing here. This is what I can think of that we can start to do for now. I'm sure we can come up with better process in the future, but for now, I think this could be the best place to start. That's all from me. Any other questions? Shoot.
If you're on the Hangout and you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Is there an easy way to get from the picture of the icon to the CSS class?
I think that's just one giant image.
Yeah, and it's they don't yet have an HTML demo, which is probably something
Well,
you
it's
guys
not
might
loaded
wanna
on
build.
that. It's not loaded on Media.
Yeah, well, the demo right now is just one big PNG image of all the icons, or an SVG or whatever. But they could probably fairly easily build an HTML icon demo, which is what we have in OUI as well, which is just like use every single icon with like a
the
description.
tooltip is like the CSS class or something.
Yeah, or whatever, or a description or whatever, and you can just you generate a fairly simple HTML page, you slap the CSS on it, and it just works. I mean, it better just work. It's like your proof that the thing you build actually works, right?
If they're there, it's working.
Yeah. And it's like if that doesn't work, then users of your software for them is certainly not going to work. So. But yeah, we found that in OUI development, HTML demos like that with like explanatory sort of clear labels help a lot in like making it self-document.
So I believe we have this demo thing going on right now here.
Oh.
It's also on the GitHub. It's called demo.html.
Ah, there you go.
Should I remake this? I believe.
So eventually this something like this cleaned up would be integrated into the Living Style Guide. So it would just be a section Living Style Guide that would cover the icon font.
But yeah, pretty much this is what I was talking about. I mean, you might want to like increase the font size in the icons or whatever, but that's just details.
I think it will be. I mean, it's a really great and useful thing in general. I think that some small steps is to try to all these things to make it more automated. Like, okay, if there's kind of a more automated process, you add an icon and automatically gets added to the demo. That would be nice. And the part that I was a bit worried about, and I think that automation can help there, is the stacking idea with colors. I think that the ideal solution to support that would be perhaps, for example, in the source SVG, some kind of naming convention that if you name or you add some information to some layers that become separate and then separate things. Because otherwise, I find it a bit hard to imagine which would be the process of adjusting an icon like this decomposed in many different places.
You can probably just have a JSON manifest of the entire directory and build on that. I mean, that's going to be a lot of information to encode into a file name. But
yeah, well, I mean,
I'm sure we could come up with something reasonable.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know the exact solution, but it's just, I mean, I would like us at least to have something in mind before we start creating a lot of these composable elements, as individual things that later we want to keep track and modify them together.
Even if this file just presented, say, a list of the icons that, say, the little lock overlaid nicely and had, those kind of grouped, even if it, was just for the purposes of the presentation here, it could.
Yeah, at least having things that are connected, also easily connected, so that I can do all the work with them in terms of modifying them, putting them together. And
yeah.
Just as a suggestion.
That's a good idea.
I've also found the concept, I think, is like, it's really cool. It helps us drive like consistency between desktop, web, and apps. Any other kind of experiences that we build. The one thing that I think would be great is, I don't know how we would share the SVGs or the AI file with a broader group of people.
Yeah, we were talking about including the source files in the repo.
That's, I think, probably the biggest challenge that we maybe identified today is just how to open that process up and automate it.
Something that I would, in an ideal world, something that I would build, which I don't know how feasible it is to build with like today's technology, is if we had all the, we'll probably end up with a process where you have all the icons as separate files, and we'll like have some build script or whatever that like builds the font. But like that still leaves the problem of like, what if you want to add icons to the standard set or whatever. If the font build process were fast enough and were ported to languages that are using the web, you could just do it on the fly in Resource Book. I mean, it's probably not very feasible with today's technology, but I like want the future to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's some fonts written in Ruby, for instance. That's not going to be great.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, all they're really doing is interfacing with FontForge, so I don't know if there's a huge code base.
It's probably like how we've done this with like C as a Janus, but like C as a Janus is a simple stream processing library, and it's easy to port. It's like 200 lines of code, easy to port to PHP, whatever. It's probably not going to be true for like a free font system. But I like to dream.
Resource loader and Node.js, man.
That also needs to happen.
There's also another kind of small element that complicates this when it comes to, designing a font glyph. You have considerations like with the letter G, the part of the G that descends below the line, and the part of the letter that might ascend above a certain range. And it's not necessarily you can just take an SVG that's trimmed around the elements and instantly create a font glyph. There may be some other considerations that might require.
Usually the way it works is it just based on the view box in the SVG.
So to touch on that, currently with the way it's been set up, all of the glyphs are the exact same size. Like they have the exact same size bounding box, and we kind of build all of the glyphs to be within that size. Currently, we're not doing anything where a particular glyph kind of hangs lower or something.
Okay.
It's not really in our.
Some of these icons don't really align that well with the text.
Oh yeah, so it's the extra instance.
It will actually be fixed after this Friday. I already know. I'm already fixing it.
So I think that's the part that when we say this is part of MediaWiki UI, that that's the thing that like there still is that kind of that hand needed. If someone submits an icon where it is maybe mathematically centered but not optically centered, that's the kind of thing where an automatic process might not catch those kinds of things.
There's also the potential for us to use combining characters, like we could have a lock icon that automatically overlays on the previous character, instead of like you having to position it.
That's clever.
Multi-byte stroke.
Yeah, there was something I was thinking some minutes ago. It's using the ligature features of fonts to deal with that, but that probably will not allow to have different colors. But it could help in case of composing elements. So it's also something to explore.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, like if, for a super basic 2-layer, you could simply use before and after. But I mean, if you wanted something a bit more complex than just 2 layers, then you'd have to create multiple elements in HTML, and then there will be a parent element that kind of just stacks them on top of each other without you having to do anything.
I mean, basically, SVGs and PNGs, they already have limitations. This has limitations as well. This is a hack. It's a clever hack, but I mean, and we're probably going to use this for the next 5 years or something. But at some point, the web will have like a better way to handle this. And just like PNGs got replaced with SVGs, at least for a short time, this will get replaced with something else. So I think that the important thing is, so far with the approach, is like it's based on CSS classes. So like we can adjust the implementation. I don't think that's in all cases going to be enough of an abstraction, but it should. I think it's a pretty defensible first line of defense against like getting too deep into having to have all these layers and all these crazy things. But like this will have limitations. Like right now, because of like visual trends, everybody uses monochrome icons. But like 5 years ago, we didn't, and nobody else did either. And once that becomes out of style, and like everybody starts using colored icons, we're going to be like going crazy trying to figure out how to make these things look color, and then we're going to switch back to SVGs because everybody uses them now.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So I mean, you know, I think it's as long as we can keep it abstract enough at the actual access point level, I think we should be in good shape. But if we get too crazy with like trying to like maximize the, I think it's going to be for naught. So we're going to throw it all away.
Just a reminder, we have 5 minutes left, and so if there's anything else that needs to be covered, otherwise we have 5 minutes for questions, but we have to stop on time.
I was wondering, the Flow is using Wikiglyph, and the example CSS was using Wikifont, or maybe vice versa. Which is the recommended CSS names?
There is a patch in Garrett that corrects it to the latest version.
But what is it? Is it
It's Wikifont.
Wikiglyph or Wikifont?
The class name is Wikiglyph. The font name is Wikifont-glyph.
Okay. So the thing in GitHub is the way you want it to go.
Right.
And this was asked a while back on Bugzilla, is when will it be available for people to start using in core?
That is a good question. It's still in its infancy. I wouldn't put it into core just yet, given that, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I would not wager it to be there for at least minimum another month. We still need to figure out any RTL issues. There's a lot of things that still need to be done before we get to that point. So that's where you guys come in. Really, you guys got to get in touch with May in particular. Get up on that GitHub page and let us know what your needs are, what your requirements are, what issues you have with this thing, and we'll see what we can do about getting those things implemented.
Should we not use GitHub for this, since every bit of our development isn't on GitHub except for this?
Well, there's a patch there's already a patch to put it in core, right? Garrett 137.888. I mean, will it eventually move to that? I mean, I think that has the assets in it, but maybe not the SVGs and stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to get it a bit more cleaned up, like fix up the licensing issues and everything before we put it into core. So
in the meantime, I mean, can we just make it a Garrett project that's not core?
yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it was just on GitHub for convenience.
All right. I guess we'll get in touch with someone to move the project over to here. All right. Any other questions, concerns, arousals?
Not yet.
I think we're done.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks.